Mr. Chairman, friends, first of all, I'm extremely grateful that I have been given this opportunity to express my compliments to Aditya for this wonderfully written book, full of scholarship and, of course, extraordinarily timely, as Irfan Saab points out in his introduction. It's timely because, as everyone says, has said in the past, that there is an immense effort by the neo-fascist elements that rule our country at present to demonize Nehru. In fact, no other leader of the anti-colonial struggle is as demonized as Nehru is. But this is not surprising, because it seems to me that no other leader of the anti-colonial struggle was as implacably opposed to fascism, as aware of the consequences of fascism, and as aware of the dangers to India that are posed by the communal fascist elements as Nehru. In fact, there is an incident which I'm sure almost everybody in this hall knows, but may I nonetheless repeat it. When Nehru was coming back after Kamala Nehru's death, there was a stopover on his way from Switzerland to India in Rome, where Mussolini was very keen to have a photo op with this Indian anti-British leader. But Nehru was so aware of the fact of being used by the fascist Il Duce that he did not agree to it. Mussolini sent an emissary who pleaded with Nehru throughout his stopover, but Nehru didn't even get down from the plane. He simply kept sitting where he was, but he would not give an opportunity to Mussolini to actually get photographed with him. Now, that was his awareness. I can't imagine any other leader at that time having that kind of a depth of understanding of fascism. And it is this which carries over and gets reflected in the hatred that the neo-fascists feel towards Nehru. But of course, the opposition to Nehru, as Aditya has said, comes not only in the last 10 years, comes not only from the neo-fascists. In fact, he quotes two economists, Meghnad Desai and Tirthankar Roy, as saying that the first 40 years after independence were a waste. In other words, the entire Nehruvian period was really a waste as far as the economy was concerned. Now, this is not just an opinion of two individuals or two persons who may have been swayed by neocolonialism, but this is in fact a very widely held opinion today in the world of economics. As a matter of fact, I have personally heard the managing director of the IMF expressing exactly the same view, and of course we know that the World Bank, for instance, with its distinction between inward-looking and outward-looking development strategies. The World Bank is very, very au fait with developing these very catchy ways of describing differences, inward-looking versus outward-looking strategies. Outward looks much better, sounds much better. Inward looks horrible. But of course, inward is what Nehru was for. And as a result, there is an attempt to run down the Nehruvian legacy. And by Nehruvian legacy, I mean the entire period from independence right up to let's say the mid-1980s. The entire dirigist period of development, economic development strategy, there's an effort to run it down, saying it was a waste of time. Now, when this is done, of course, everybody agrees that inequalities in the country have increased. But then they say, all right, inequalities may have increased, and we know from figures which are floating around, Piketty and others, that inequality today is much greater than at any time. That actually in 1982, the top 1% of the population had only 6% of the national income, and this had already increased to about 21% by by 2013-14, and today it is 22.6%. So we know inequalities have increased remarkably. But when this is pointed out, typically the argument is, but so what? Poverty has disappeared. We now have people saying that poverty in India is down to 5% of the population, that actually some say that it's going to already disappeared or about to disappear. Now, none of this is true. And the fact that it is not true is something which is so patently obvious, and occasionally it actually becomes very clear and manifest. I'll give just one illustration. The illustration is that let us take the most elemental necessity of life, that is food. The erstwhile Planning Commission in 1973-74, when poverty studies began, had defined poverty as anyone having less than 2,200 calories per person per day, and in rural India, and having 2,100 calories per person per day in urban India. The proportion of such people was about 56% in 73-74, and even in 1993-94, shortly after India had introduced neoliberalism, this proportion was 58%, so more or less kind of steady. In fact, one of the remarkable achievements of the post-colonial period, post-independence period, is that compared to the rapid increase in poverty before that, you actually had a stabilization of it. But the period after 1993-4 has seen a remarkable increase in poverty defined in these terms. In 2011-12, it was 68%, and in 2017-18, it was so bad that the Modi government decided to suppress the data and to change the entire method of estimation of poverty. But if you make some calculations, then you'd find that it was actually rural poverty I'm talking about, exceeded 80%. Now this is absolutely remarkable. So people who shout themselves hoarse about the period of Nehruvian economic strategy being a waste completely miss the point that it is not just inequality that has increased, it's actually a worsening in the state of nutritional poverty for the vast masses of the Indian people. Now the point is that this has actually become worse now, we know, because there has been an economic crisis which is making itself felt as far as our economy is concerned too, in terms of growing unemployment and so on. Unemployment was already quite high by 2019-20, and now it is even higher. And of course, in the context of this, there is absolutely nothing which can be done within a neoliberal setting of the kind we have been having to overcome this crisis. Because typically the methods of generating demand in the economy through government expenditure would succeed in generating demand in the economy only if the resources are not raised at the expense of the people. Because if you raise the resources at the expense of the people, they consume their incomes anyway. So the point is, you would simply take one form of demand away from them in order to inject another form of demand. If you wish to overcome the crisis, either you must encourage fiscal deficit, which the international finance does not allow you, or you must tax the rich, which again international finance and the domestic corporate oligarchy would not allow you. Therefore, there is no way that we can actually either overcome the nutritional poverty or overcome the unemployment and crisis which currently afflicts the economy by the neoliberal methods. And neoliberalism, to my mind, is what provides the basis for neo-fascism. It provides the basis for neo-fascism. It did in the 1930s, when the unemployment of the Great Depression was the cause for the emergence of fascism in Japan and Germany, and it is something which is again once more creating this mood. After all, just imagine all over the world, Milei in Argentina, Trump in the United States, Orban in Hungary, Erdogan in Greece, in Turkey, Modi in India, AfD in Germany, which of course hasn't come to power, or Marine Le Pen in France, or UKIP, all the emergence of fascism as an international phenomenon is because of the crisis of neoliberalism, which cannot be overcome within neoliberalism itself. You have to have once more a revival of a Nehruvian kind of thinking. And to my mind, it would be the ultimate vindication of Nehru that, as a matter of fact, to revive the economy, we have to go back to the kind of economic regime that he had advocated all his life. Thank you.